Hello, BookTube. A little viral thingamajig is going around our little corner of BookTube. It started with an innocent, very good conversation on Eric Carl Anderson's channel about top 5 English novels. And that migrated. People thought, well, I'd like to weigh in on my top 5 English novels, even though such an explicit response was not actually called for. And then that response was weaponized into a tag, your top 5 English novels tag, and a whole bunch more people got involved because booktubers can't resist their tags. But then that started to fracture. So when Matthew at Mayberry Book Club got a hold of that, he thought, well, but okay, I wasn't blown away by my top 5 English novels. What about un-English novels? And then he did books in translation, and now there are fractured versions everywhere. And I couldn't be happier about that. I think this thing should go on forever. And so in the spirit of that, I have a version of this tag myself today. And it is my top 5 novels written by guys named Mike. We will start first with this one. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It is a 1,000-page, brilliant epic of a type that Russians seem to be able to write before they got out of bed in the morning. It's by Mikhail Sholokhov, and it is Quiet Flows the Dawn. This is the cover from a newer translation that's largely, as far as I know, unexpurgated, unabridged. A lot of times when you're in used bookstores and you see a little mass market paperback of this, it will be an abridged version of a dodgy translation. This one, does it say? Oh, well, it says what the translator is, but the picture is so blurry I can't read it. I'll try and leave a note down below. But this is a massive novel about the Cossacks during decades of their history, during decades in which they are trying to ride out, no pun intended, some of the most seismic changes ever to strike Russian civilization, and they are an inherently conservative bunch. And it's full of characters. There's amazing natural descriptions, tons and tons of subplots, just exactly what you'd expect. I mean, it's in that sense a traditional full-dress Russian epic novel. It's just I don't see it getting the readership. It never had a very lush, soft-focused, romantic, runaway hit movie adaptation. There have been movie adaptations, but nothing like Dr. Zhivago, for instance. It's never, in its unedited form, made its way into school curricula, especially, freshman college, sophomore college, something like that. So it hasn't been perpetuated in that way, and as such, I fear for it. But if you've got a sweet tooth for the Russians and you haven't read this thing, find the version that looks like this. Any older version won't give you the full effect, but then definitely read it. You're going to love it. Then the next Mike that we'll deal with is Michael Chabon. This is his book, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. It's had many, many covers. It's basically a fictionalized novel about the story of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the founders of Marvel Comics. Only there's a lot more going on than that. That is, I believe, the worm in the bud of this book. I think that was its ultimate germination, was that. But this is an endlessly inventive author. If any of you have ever read the Yiddish Policeman's Union, you'll know he's an endlessly inventive writer, and he never leaves a novel the gist of it alone. He works on it and fleshes it out and hyper fertilizes it until it grows out of all control, and yet wonderfully. This is a wonderful, wonderful novel. You don't need to like comic books. You don't need to know anything about them either, about their origins in either the pair of boys that made Marvel Comics, the pair of young guys that made Marvel Comics, or the pair of boys who made DC Comics. You don't need to know or care about either one of those. This will just wrap you up. Then the next Mike that we'll deal with in our list of my top 5 favorite books by authors named Mike is Michael Gruber. I don't know how many of you will know this author. He writes terrific thrillers, just fantastic thrillers that respect your intelligence, which is rare. Most thrillers don't. And yet the book that I want to recommend is not. It has thrilling aspects, especially in the third act, but it's not a contemporary novel. It's not a thriller. It's historical. It's The Book of Air and Shadows, which is a lot of it takes place in the present day, but it centers around a lost Shakespeare manuscript. And there's a ton of learning in here, a ton of heavily assimilated footnotes. It it's reading this book and being thrilled by it. If you're a bookish person, Shakespeare person, you got to read this thing. But when you're reading this book, if you've ever read any other Michael Gruber, his more explicit thrillers, Night of the Jaguar, that sort of thing, uh, it's only when you read this book that you'll realize, that you'll sort of think, oh, wait a minute, there was a lot of research in those books too. I didn't pay any attention to it at the time because it doesn't look like research if it doesn't have Shakespeare in it. The research in this book looks like research, still fantastically conveyed. But it makes you, what I'm saying is it ups your estimation of this author just across the board. He's well worth your time. Then the next Mike is Michael Blanding. This is a book that came to me out of the blue. It also revolves around Shakespeare. I am a sucker for this subject, for the so-called Shakespeare authorship controversy, to the extent that there is one. And this is a book by Michael Blanding called North by Shakespeare, a rogue scholar's quest for the truth behind the bard's work. And the rogue scholar here is not Michael Blanding. It's a different guy whose story Blanding thought would make a great, engrossing book. The story of that rogue scholar woven into the story of what we know about Shakespeare's textual provenance and why there might be any cause for a Shakespeare authorship controversy, why there might be any doubt, why people have been harrying this bone for centuries. And Blanding was completely right. There is a fantastic story involved there. And almost accidentally, this book is mainly at its most joyful when it is telling the story of that rogue scholar, who is not given a pass. He's not made into any kind of a Christ-like figure. He's there warts and all. But almost accidentally, in the course of telling that story, I think this book puts forward the solution to the textual anomalies that crop up in Shakespeare's work, that are seen by everybody except strident Shakespeare purists who say, no, there's nothing at all to see here. There are no legitimate questions to raise here. And everybody from Sigmund Freud to Helen Keller to George Bernard Shaw, we're all just imagining. They're all just raving lunatics. This book takes on those questions and provides an answer that involves a writer in Shakespeare's day, and I think is beyond question. Certainly this book should be required study in any graduate level Shakespeare course that deals in any way with Shakespeare's literary provenance. It's just an amazing, but it's also an amazing read. I reviewed this. I don't at the top of my head remember who I reviewed this for, but I loved it. I couldn't go on. It was one of the few times where I was sorry that I had a word limit, as I would have gone on for 2,000 words about how good this is. Not only how enjoyable a reading experience it is. It doesn't read like a scholarly work at all. It reads like Michael Lewis. Not only that, but also how utterly fascinating it is, the light it sheds on Shakespeare's work. So that's our other Mike, and then we will finish out the last Mike on our list of my top 5 books by Mike. One of them is not a novel, but I have a tie for first place. And the first book is by Michael Grant, and it is called Gone. A lot of you will know this series. This is the first book in a young adult series about a bunch of teenagers who are cut off from the outside world and start haphazardly to develop superpowers. And the main character is an unassuming young man who's gently mocked by his school fellows as, school bus Sam. But he proves the antithesis. This book is in some ways the antithesis of Lord of the Flies. Sam, the main character, and a couple of other kids that he draws into his orbit are the good. They when they're cut off and it's every kid for themselves, you expect that you are almost immediately, but certainly inevitably, going to encounter the stick being sharpened at both ends, and that doesn't happen. I think I'm making this sound a lot more sententious than it is. It's actually very, very enjoyable as just a YA adventure story. But I think one of the author's implicit points is that inherent good is as tenacious as inherent evil, and will show up. It's not that it will vanish the minute people are cut off and have superpowers. So that's one of the ones that I want to mention. The other one is nonfiction, but it reads like a novel. It reads like really good studied fiction, like everything this author wrote. So this will be a recommendation of this book, but also a recommendation of this author, who is also named Michael Grant. This is The 12 Caesars by Michael Grant. Michael Grant was a classicist who never lost the popular touch, wrote a ton of popular classical-oriented works. Histories, biographies, textual treatments, all kinds of things. This is, in my opinion, my favorite book by him. I don't actually own a copy at the moment. I'll grab one the next time I see it at the Brattle. But this is his answer to 2,000 years of readers who have looked at Suetonius's the book, The 12 Caesars, and thought, boy, this is enjoyable. I love it. I'm gobbling it up. I'm reading the footnotes. I'm reading the introduction. But what I'd really like is a version of Suetonius in which the 19th century rules of academic history laid down by the Germans are followed. Suetonius didn't know anything about those rules. He wasn't writing. He was trying to take care of his sources, but he was also trying to tell a good story. And we don't do that anymore. History doesn't do that anymore. And many, many people have read Suetonius's The 12 Caesars throughout the millennia and said, well, this is fantastic, and it's one of my favorite works from the classical world. It certainly will be yours. If you haven't read Suetonius, it certainly will end up being one of your favorite works from the classical world. But a lot of those people have read that and thought, well, I really like this, but I wish I knew what was true and what wasn't. Now, I would say that is the wrong question to ask almost any ancient historian, even the ones who go on at great length about the care with which they're handling their sources, as quite a few of them do. I still say it's the wrong question to ask, but it is ingrained now, and it's better for all of us. It's better for the Republic of Letters that question is ingrained. That is a good question. I'm not meaning to say otherwise. But this is Michael Grant's answer to that question. This is his version of Suetonius about the first 12 Caesars, only vetted with the best classical and historical, historiographical research that a really trained classicist can bring to it. And it's a perfect companion to Suetonius, and a great chance for me to recommend this author just across the board. He never wrote anything that wasn't totally engaging. Why there isn't like a standard box set of his, 12 or 15 greatest works, I do not know. But if you find this author in a yard sale or something like, he's out of print, he'll stay out of print. But if you find him at a yard sale or something like that, as you often do, he was very popular, gobble him up, because he's terrific and will really make introducing you to the classical world about as painless as it can get if you don't have Greek or Latin. So there you go. That is a list of my top 5 books written by guys named Mike. And I will continue. I will chase down a whole bunch more fractions of this little weird top 5 mania that's going on in due time. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.